Hi, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. I'm Kara Horowitz. I'm Executive Director of the Emmett Institute on Climate Change and the Environment at UCLA School of Law. I'm really thrilled to have you with us here today for the webinar launching our recent report called Driving Demand: Solutions to Increase the Market for Heavy-Duty Zero-Emission Vehicles. It's a joint report of UCLA and my colleagues at Berkeley's CLEE. It's the latest in a long series of solutions-oriented reports we've worked on together for many, many years, um, all focused on aspects of the climate change problem and on business opportunities to find solutions. This has obviously been an especially challenging year for ZEV, zero-emission vehicles of all sorts, which makes California's ongoing work in this space even more important, if that were possible. So I'm really looking forward to today's discussion. Before we launch, I would be remiss not to say we couldn't do this work without the longstanding support of our partners and friends at Bank of America, who have supported this initiative for many, many years. I'm very glad to have Brian Putler with us from the bank. He's the Senior Vice President of California Government Relations. Welcome, Brian. I'll toss it to you.
Good. Thank you very much, Kara. And good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of Bank of America, I'm honored to welcome you to today's webinar. We're proud to be the original sponsor of the Climate Change and Business Research Initiative and to support its mission of advancing practical, market-driven solutions for a sustainable future. For today's discussion on the strategies to accelerate heavy-duty zero-emission vehicles builds on the initiative's important work in areas like ports and good movements, critical sectors for reducing emissions and improving air quality, and at the same time, critical sectors for jobs in industry in California. Bank of America values its longstanding partnership with the initiative because we share a commitment to innovation and collaboration that drives progress to a low-carbon economy. So thank you to all of today's participants for leading these conversations that move us forward. And I will turn it over to Ethan Elkind.
All right. Thank you so much, Brian. Thank you all for joining. I just want to echo the gratitude for the bank's long support for this initiative, and also to Kara and her team at UCLA. It's been a wonderful partnership between UC Berkeley Law, UCLA Law. It dates back to 2009, and all the reports in this series are available on a dedicated website for the initiative called climatepolicysolutions.org. That's climatepolicysolutions.org. So you can see all the reports we put out in our series histories dating back to 2009. I'm pleased to say that many of the reports are actually out of date because we've achieved success on many of the topics that we've covered. And I'd like to be able to credit, some of the reports for helping being part of that sort of policy ecosystem to get some of these solutions adopted and implemented here in California. A quick note about UC Berkeley Law, or Center for Law, Energy, and the Environment. I direct the climate program at CLEE, also have an affiliation with UCLA Law dating back to the beginning of this partnership. And at CLEE, the mission is to advance solutions, law and policy solutions to pressing environmental challenges. And in the climate program, this is a big part of what we do with the series here, supported by Bank of America in partnership with UCLA Law, convening people and convening stakeholders, experts on different thorny topics in California's climate change world, and then developing policy solutions. And that's how this report came about. So the report is called Driving Demand: Solutions to Increase the Market for Heavy-Duty Zero-Emission Vehicles. And for the format of the webinar today, first, we're going to hear an overview of the report, just to give you some kind of quick highlight solutions. Then we're going to have a keynote by California Energy Commissioner Nancy Skinner. And then we'll finish off with a panel. We have Ray Minjares and Adam Browning. I'll introduce them when it comes time for the panel to close it out. And then throughout this webinar, we also are happy to take questions from all of you who are tuning in and listening. So please do use the Q&A function. Hopefully you can all find that on the Zoom menu here. Type in your questions. We can't guarantee we can get to all of them. We're going to try to curate them and as best we can and leave as much time as we can, but just wanted to let all of you know that that option is available for you to be able to pose your questions. And if we can't get to them during our webinar here, we'll see if we can get to it. Maybe some of the speakers will be able to follow up afterwards. All right, with that, let's launch into it. So I want to introduce CLEE's Environmental Policy Research Fellow, Marie Grimm, who served as really the lead author on the report, and she'll provide a bit of a kind of a highlight overview of some of the issue of clean trucks, and then some of the policy solutions that we have encapsulated in the report. And it'll just be a teaser, so we'll encourage you to dig into the full report if you want to get more details. So I'll hand it over to Marie.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Ethan. Let me share my slides really quick. Here we go. So I'm an environmental policy research fellow at the Center for Law, Energy, and the Environment, and I'm very excited to present some key findings from our report on driving demand for zero-emission trucks. And there we go. Diesel trucks are major contributors to greenhouse gas emissions and air pollution. Although they only make up a really small amount of vehicles in California, they account for a quarter of the state's on-road greenhouse gas emissions and about 35% of transportation cost nitrogen oxide emissions, which are bad for air quality. And these emissions especially impact low-income communities near shipping centers and highways. Now, when we look at this figure here, we can see the gray and yellow lines show that heavy and medium duty zero emission truck deployment across the US has grown in recent years. But this demand is still not enough to match the pace of the transition that is needed to meet climate and air quality goals. And instead of speeding up and supporting this much needed transition, recent federal actions have unfortunately undermined California's policies to support this transition. For example, Congress voted to terminate California's mandate on truck makers to produce zero-emission models. So with this in mind, as Kara already highlighted, the state now has an opportunity to step up and provide the much needed policy support to speed up the transportation transition. And to meet this moment, earlier in 2025 in May, we convened experts at UCLA to identify key barriers hindering market development and also to discuss solutions to overcoming these barriers. And the key barriers that we identified, which you can also find in our report, are lack of policy support to drive demand, specifically at the federal level, high total cost of ownership, which includes purchasing costs, but also operational costs like fueling cost and the cost of having to stop longer to charge an electric truck, for example. And lastly, negative perceptions of zero-emission trucks pose a barrier to increased demand. Now, what is it that state leaders in California can do to help overcome these barriers? And these are just a few examples that we want to highlight here. For one, the legislature could create a clean mile standard for freight, which would require shippers to meet a certain percentage of the miles their goods travel to be via clean technology like zero-emission trucks. The legislature could also create revenue-neutral self-funding incentive programs. So fees on non-zero-emission vehicles would fund rebates for zero-emission trucks. And state leaders in general should ensure that all truck purchase incentives are long-term, flexible, and stackable so that they reduce the risk and the uncertainty for the industry. And finally, the legislature could also exempt zero-emission trucks from the state sales tax or at least ensure that they don't pay more than their diesel counterparts in both sales taxes and registration fees. In addition, the California Air Resources Board could create a statewide indirect source rule under the Clean Air Act. And this rule would require facilities like ports or big warehouses that generate pollution indirectly because they attract a lot of truck traffic to reduce emissions from that vehicle traffic. And last but not least, ports could also create incentives, such as by providing green lanes, preferential reservation, or reduced fees for zero-emission trucks. And as I mentioned, these are just a few examples. And if you'd like to know more, please take a look at our report. You can find it on climatepolicysolutions.org and also on our website and the Emmett Institute website. And I'm excited to hear more inputs today. I'm going to pass it back to Ethan. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Marie. And yeah, that was just a nice kind of tease on some of the report, some of the solutions that we have in the report. And there's definitely a lot more recommendations that you can find in the report. So we do encourage folks to click on those links that Marie shared. And now, without further ado, I want to introduce our keynote speaker for this webinar. Commissioner Nancy Skinner is on the California Energy Commission serving her first term. Governor Newsom appointed her in January of 2025, so she's served now 1 full year. Hard to believe, as the engineer scientist member of the commission. Many of you may already know Commissioner Skinner from her work as a state senator from 2016 to 2024, and before that from 2008 to 2014, where she authored numerous landmark pieces of legislation on climate and clean technology. Prior to her time in the state legislature, she served on the Berkeley City Council from 1994 to 1992. She's also held some academic positions in between all of this. So from 2015 to 2016, she was senior advisor at the Energy and Efficiency Institute at UC Davis, a lecturer at the Goldman School of Public Policy at UC Berkeley. She's also served on our advisory board at CLEE. And I have to mention, since I'm based at UC Berkeley, that she got her Bachelor of Science and Masters of Arts in Education from UC Berkeley. So proud bear, I know. And Commissioner Skinner, I'm looking forward to hearing your remarks. I'll hand it over to you.
Ethan, thanks so much for the kind introduction, and Cara for your presentation on the report, Driving Demand. And I was well, number one, I really want to thank CLEE for putting out that report and appreciate being invited to participate not only in this webinar, but as one of the stakeholders who helped brainstorm some of the policies and programs that the report examines that could help us drive the demand for our medium duty and heavy duty as we move to convert to zero emission transportation. Now, while our subject is the medium duty, heavy duty sector, I want to give you some good news. We are now crunching the numbers on the last quarter sales for light duty EVs. And many of you may have paid attention that the previous quarter, so the quarter that ended September 30th, which is when the federal tax incentives still existed, California beat its sales records. We had 29% of new cars sold were ZEVs. And now this quarter, what we're seeing nationwide, and those numbers are out there, it dropped, well, they weren't at 29%, but they were at a pretty good number. Nationwide, it's dropped to 5.2%, the ZEV sales, which is really unfortunate. But California didn't go anywhere near there. And while we have not released the numbers yet, I'll just tell you that our numbers were better. There was a drop, which is expected with the elimination of incentives, but not anything like the national. So that is great news, and we hope to stay the course. But clearly, what the feds are doing is seriously trying to impact and basically stop California's momentum. And within the heavy duty, medium duty sector, this is a very, very important area. And as Cara pointed out, and as the report points out, look, the MD and HD sector are only 6% of the vehicles on California's road, okay? But they are the key contributors to our continued dirty air. We're not even talking the climate emissions. We're just talking about the air pollution precursors. And California still is in non-attainment. And we have areas, pockets of our state with ongoing very dirty air, which has huge impacts on the health of Californians. And some people have begun to translate some of these changes as to what they're going to do from a health point of view and how many more deaths we may experience if we cannot control these smog forming emissions. So given our continued air quality challenges, this is a very important sector for California. And it's the very reason that we had a waiver under the Clean Air Act because of our continued air quality challenges, and the very reason that California enacted a zero-emission truck mandate. But of course, is pointed out, the Congress voted to overturn our permission, the federal permission for both our mandate, that was last June, the waiver was eliminated before that, and they terminated the tax incentives that help lower the costs for ZEV vehicles in general, but also ZEV trucks. Despite that, this past fall, and we don't have the numbers for this last quarter yet, that it takes a little longer. We have to crunch all the DMV registrations. But this past fall, our Air Resources Board reported nearly 1 in 4 new trucks, buses, and vans that were sold within our state were zero emission. And they made up about 23% of total MD and HD sales in California, meaning that was what the percent was of ZEV compared to regular fossil fueled, whether it's gas or diesel, though primarily these are diesel. Now, if you go on to the CEC's website, we have a dashboard and we show these kind of sales numbers. Now, our dashboard reports the data a bit differently than CARB because we do it based on weight class definitions. So that's one of the differences. They do it on weight class definitions. We do it on other kinds of definitions. But part of that is CARB is focused on the air quality emissions primarily, and we're focused on other aspects. Someday, maybe we'll reconcile it. I am talking to our staff about how we can maybe list both so that so nobody who would go up to either website would think somehow the state is communicating, a contradictory information. But it's mostly that difference of we use the Federal Highway Administration's classifications, which are the standard for transportation planning, and ARB uses EPA's weight classifications for their purposes. But anyway, we may consolidate it and show both so that people can see why there's that difference. But anyway, today's discussion is focused on what can state agencies, private industry, and all of us working together do to boost the demand for zero emission, medium duty, and heavy duty vehicles. Now, one of the barriers that the commission I now serve on, the Energy Commission, is focused on, and we've been given directive by the legislature to do so, as well as funding, is to support the deployment and development of both electric charging and hydrogen fueling infrastructure so that our freight operators, our fleet operators, others can feel confident that if they purchase these types of vehicles, they will not be stranded, that they will have the capacity to, have them charged or have them fueled. And the hydrogen market is a little bit more challenging right now. We've seen the hydrogen prices go way up, and we've also seen some of the funding that we have provided to entities that were going to build out hydrogen fueling infrastructure, return it. Though where we're seeing hydrogen is continued interest and continued funding for that infrastructure is within our transit operators. So hopefully that'll continue. Hopefully the hydrogen price will go down. But otherwise, on the ZEV front, we have, and our we do these grant solicitations from the funding that the legislature has given us, and also now the feds under NEVI, which fortunately, with the NEVI funding, Trump administration tried to take it back, but we won in court, so we have access to it again. But with that funding, we are basically putting out solicitations to do the type of charging and fueling infrastructure for both EV and H2. Though we are getting more applications for the BEV vehicles and for the charging than we are for the hydrogen, as I mentioned. But anyway, we currently have open solicitations for up to 120 million for that infrastructure. And just last month, we awarded under a program we call Energize, we awarded 26 million to support the MDHD infrastructure. And another 58 million is currently being scored. So applications were already received. It's being scored and evaluated to support this type of infrastructure. And we plan to open another group of solicitations of up to 75 million before June 30th, again, to support whether it's school buses, transit buses, other MDHD corridor charging, refueling, the whole bit. Now, the report, CLEE's great report, very accurately and legitimately shows that one of the big issues, if you're one of these goods movement operators, is the cost of acquiring a zero-emission vehicle. It is much more expensive than the diesel vehicles. But the good news is that Tesla, their new updated semi-truck, which will come off their Sparks, Nevada line this year, they're already in production, so it'll be coming out, rolling out in 26, is estimated, and they haven't put the price on it yet, but all the, if you look it up, there's various estimations is that it will, range in somewhere in the 300 to 350,000 for the purchase price with a 500-mile range, which is about the range that a truck driver, can't exceed before they take a certain amount of time break they're required to take. And Tesla is also building out charging infrastructure so that the charging for that truck would take no longer than the break that those drivers would be required to take. So they're really thinking about it seamlessly. And that's going to help. They're also working, as I mentioned, to build out that infrastructure. So while the purchase price is still higher than diesel, and unfortunately, the purchase price of battery heavy-duty trucks in the US is higher than in Europe or in other countries, and certainly higher than China. Hopefully, if we align other incentives and we get the kind of interest, we can have some competition here and we can get those prices driven down even further. But anyway, so while it's still a higher purchase price, there's a lower total cost of ownership because the charging with electricity, even with our rates, is cheaper per mile than refueling with diesel. And the maintenance of a BEV vehicle, a battery electric vehicle, is significantly lower. So one example is Uber Freight adopted the Tesla Semi for their dedicated EV fleet accelerator program. And they've been tracking their trucks' efficiency and their cost effectiveness. And they found that users could save up to 300,000 over the course of an 800,000 mile usage of the vehicle. So, and I'm sure some of you have seen the Pepsi trucks that are Tesla trucks. And, as far as, if I look around for different reports or literature or such, indications are that Pepsi is happy with that performance. So we're happy to see that, we, the state agency. But we are still committed to building out the infrastructure that is going to be needed to support this type of vehicle. And as I mentioned, the different funding streams that we have out there, we also, just to give you an example, the legislature is also still very committed to this sector because the last minute action at the end of session in September of 25, when they were re-upping the now cap and invest was cap and trade program and doing various other things and adopted the greenhouse gas allocations. The only ZEV action that they took in that was designating 38 million for the MDHD sector, which my understanding is they really intended for HD, and so they may modify that and it may be restricted to HD only. But independent of that, the point is the only legislative action in this space was for that sector. But we need to do more to keep the demand going. And there's some really, really good ideas and policy and other type of suggestions in CLEE's report. And I thought I would just take a moment and reference a few things that I think would help us as we shape that. Now, clearly, we're going to hear from, panelists who have some more direct experience. I can't say that I can wax, with expertise about exactly what our fleet operators need, our heavy duty, our freight goods movement, operators need. I'm not one of them. And while I interact with them frequently as in my new role, I have to deal with the entire infrastructure of ZEV vehicles. So, but point being is that we will hear some from some people in this webinar. But I wanted to also say that while the stakeholder group that CLEE used for this report had some operators and some logistics folks, it would be wise for us all, before we land on what the right policy prescriptions are, to interact some more, to get some more stakeholder input as to what is it really that is going to help the truck owners and operators move to these types of vehicles, right? What is it that we most can do to support them? Because oftentimes it's not always what we think, right? And it may not be logical to us, but it may be exactly what they need. So I think some more interaction with that sector will help us land on which of the many good policy recommendations that are in the report, are really the ones to push for. Now, the other thing I was going to raise is that any observers of the legislature and the governor's office, of course, will have noted that affordability is the mantra these days. And we see that electricity rates, unfortunately, have gone up. There's also some budgetary constraints that the state is facing. While revenues are up, they are kind of one-time only revenues that are up, and long-term projections show some deficit. So some of the policy recommendations that are in the report require certain types of incentives or tax expenditures that might be considered long-term and might be considered like as hits against the general fund. So as you're projecting, if you're one of the bean counters who's projecting out California's deficit numbers, you're going to go, no, we don't go there. So it might be really wise to look at what's in place already and isn't going to impact the budget that way. So our LCFF, for example, the low carbon fuel standard, is now secure. It doesn't need legislative action. So tweaks there that can help our heavy duty space, could be very beneficial and obviously are within CARB's purview to do. The other thing is looking at some of the budget changes, whether it's like the sales tax equalization, which I think is a good idea because sales tax is on purchase price. And obviously, if the purchase price of the EV is higher than the diesel truck, then you're gonna, you're in effect are also driving up the price of the ZEV vehicle. But that's again a hit against the general fund. So maybe registration fees, equalizing those so there's not a penalty on weight, might be an easier thing. And you also always have to look at what things are scored as 2/3 votes. Because if they need the legislature to change it, if it's a 2/3 vote change, it's much harder to get. And obviously you don't need a 2/3 vote change for CARB to do some fixes to the LCFF. The electricity rate changes, while there'll be hesitation to do anything like that only because there's much concern now that rates are too expensive for everybody. If there's a way to design some rate adjustments that would not hurt other consumers of electricity, that again could be a very good thing for incentivizing our move to the zero emission freights. Um, but anyway, so I just thought I would point some of those things out because clearly we do need to do more. And just putting in the infrastructure alone, which is essential, and we're going to keep doing it, is not going to be enough. It'll need some of these other actions. But I wanted to raise some of those things as you think it through. And happy to take some questions.
All right. Thank you so much, Commissioner Skinner. Really great to get your kind of, view of the landscape here of clean truck deployment, what's on tap, and where some of the money's going from the Energy Commission. We don't have a huge amount of time for Q&A, but we did get a question in asking about if there's a map or some other database of where the chargers are that the Energy Commission has been funding for the chargers that you mentioned.
I believe there is. How up to date it is exactly, I have to check so I can get back. But it's yes, we have had maps on our website before, and we do try to keep them up to date.
All right, great. And I guess one more question. We did get a point that someone made in the Q&A about the challenge of deploying the grid infrastructure. I know that's not exactly the purview of the Energy Commission, a little bit more on the Public Utilities Commission side, but just wondering if you wanted to respond on the grid deployment.
Well, this one, of course, anybody who has tried to put in chargers for heavy duty because they are of a higher power than chargers for light duty vehicles has experienced, depending on the circumstance, troubles with if the area, the substation, for example, where you're trying to put those chargers is already at capacity, then it's very hard to get either the permission or the energization of it. But one of the things that the PUC has required the utilities to do is to allow for flex demand. And we know that our charger operators have the ability to, while they may install a certain power charger, it doesn't have to draw that at all times. So it's not like the substation is going to be having that capacity drawn on it all the time. And you can, with good software, with other means, you can, in effect, control that demand. And there's a number of our IOUs have been very cooperative about that. Some lately have not been. So it's now before the PUC to pay more attention to like get them on the straight and narrow and not be playing games with that. But that's one of the tools that a charger installer has at their availability to help with this energization issue.
All right, great. Thank you so much. Well, unfortunately, we're out of time. I did see a few other questions come in. If you're able to stick around and maybe answer those by writing, that would be great. If not, we certainly understand. But thank you very much, Commissioner Skinner, for
Sure.
your remarks today. And with that, I want to turn to our panel now. We've got two distinguished panelists who really are in the field on this in different capacities. First, I want to welcome Ray Minjares, heavy duty vehicles program director at the International Council on Clean Transportation, or ICCT. Ray works internationally on heavy duty vehicle policies, but a lot of his focus has been here in California, and he is based at the ICCT San Francisco office. He also has a master's degree in public health from UC Berkeley, so I had to point that out as well. And we're also joined by Adam Browning, who is executive vice president of finance at Forum Mobility. It's a private startup working to electrify heavy-duty fleets, bringing zero-emission goods movement solutions to U.S. ports specifically. Prior to his role at Forum Mobility, some of you may know Adam from his role as the former executive director of Vote Solar, which is a national nonprofit advocacy organization helping to advance 100% clean and equitable energy systems in the U.S., and he's a graduate of Swarthmore and served in the Peace Corps. So with that, I want to welcome Ray and Adam. And Ray, I wanted to kick things off with you. Just if you can maybe describe the work of your organization, ICCT, and maybe more specifically what you're seeing right now in terms of the clean truck market. the supply and the demand side. I know you've got some slides, so I'll hand it over to you to walk us through those.
Well, thank you for that wonderful introduction, Ethan, and thanks as well to all the staff at CLEE and at UCLA who supported the development of this report. And as you said, ICCT is an international organization, and as an international organization focused on the transition to zero-emission vehicles, we conduct a lot of research on the state of the transition. So what I thought I could do in response to your question, Ethan, is just share a bit of that data, both in terms of what we're seeing in the US market today, as well as how that compares to the way this transition is looking elsewhere. And I think it's important to provide this perspective, first of all, to make clear to folks that when we talk about electric trucks, we're not talking about some pie in the sky technology. This technology is here today. It's commercially available. It's widespread in many parts of the world. And the question is, how do we drive down the cost and drive up the volume of sales so that more people can breathe clean air? A perspective on what that transition looks like in the US is, I think, illustrated first here in the slide I'm showing to you now. And to be clear, I'm illustrating just what we call the class 4 and larger vehicle segments. So I'm actually not capturing things like Amazon, let's say, the Rivian delivery vans you might see Amazon drivers driving, or the BrightDrop delivery trucks. So actually, this is reflective primarily of those larger, what some might call heavy duty vehicles. And what the data show is that since 2021, there has been, growth. One might have said, growth that's looking kind of exponential up until we hit a peak in about the first quarter of 2024. And things have sort of flatlined since then. And our data only goes out to the end of the first quarter of last year. We're in the process of publishing the next few quarters that should come out by the end of the month on our website. But suffice it to say that sales of class 4 and larger zero-emission vehicles in the US account for less than 1% of all sales. Now, we're still talking about pretty small numbers in the context of the entire transportation fleet. As Commissioner Skinner said, this segment of commercial vehicles is just 6% of all the vehicles on the road. Now, we have state level data, and that clearly shows that California is ahead of the pack, followed by states like Washington and New Jersey. These are states that have very much embraced the transition to zero-emission commercial vehicles. Washington State has a major port with the Northwest Seaport Alliance, including Tacoma and Seattle. And then New Jersey, of course, has the Port of New York and New Jersey. These are states that have also embraced Californian policies, including policies like the Advanced Clean Trucks Rule, that requires the sale of zero-emission trucks. This is an example of one of the rules that has been pretty directly attacked and undermined by the federal government and is currently in doubt. But I wanted to start with this perspective so people understand where we are in the US transition. And then I wanted to compare that to what this looks like in other parts of the world. And I think the best illustration is Europe. So here I'm illustrating two figures. The one on the left is showing sales of zero-emission trucks and buses since 2017 in selected European member states. And so on the left-hand side, we're showing the 12-ton and larger. Think of that as the equivalent in the US would be, say, class 7 and larger. And on the right-hand side, we've got the class 3, 3.5 ton to 12-ton trucks. Think of those as like Amazon delivery vans up until, say, class 6, right before we get into the class 7 categories. What I think is so striking about these figures is just the first of all, the pace at which sales have rapidly grown in these markets, particularly in Denmark, the Netherlands, and Sweden, which are the clear leaders in the European Union today. And just how large the sales shares are. I mean, we're seeing, nearly 3 out of 4 commercial trucks in that 3.5 to 12-ton category that are electric. These are purely zero emission. And these were, in the case of the Netherlands, it wasn't that long ago, 2022, when maybe we were, at a level that we are today in the US. So all of this to say that the transition can happen very quickly. But certainly one thing that stands out when I think about the policy landscape that has really enabled much of this investment in electrification is that the European Union has maintained its supply side regulations, providing a clear and strong signal to particularly the vehicle manufacturers to continue the production and sale of these products in such a way that they are almost in a sense overwhelming the demand, which actually leads to lower prices for these products and ultimately drives greater uptake of those products. Another perspective on it comes from the differences in the upfront prices that we see between the United States and the European Union countries. So these three figures illustrate the ratio of battery electric vehicle price to internal combustion engine vehicle price and their trends across three weight categories, comparing the European Union and the United States. So if you want to focus, say, just on the European Union, you follow the blue lines here. And what we find is that in the European Union, basically those class 2B and 3 vans and trucks, again, say the Amazon Rivian vans, they're costing about 1.5 times the price of an equivalent diesel or gasoline version. If we look at the class 8 category in the European Union, it's more like 2.5 times an equivalent class 8 tractor. And because we're comparing this against the trend lines in the US, you can see the ways in which the blue trend lines in the European Union have certainly either have been mildly declining, right, consistently and steadily across the class 2B to 6, and really dramatically falling in the class 8. Whereas on the US side, you could see that there are trends in that direction, and especially strong on the smallest size of vehicles, the class 2B and 3, where we're nearly at the same sort of level, the 1.5 times level that we see in Europe. And that can explain the very large volume of those electric Rivian vans and others that we're seeing in the US. But on the class 8 side, the trend line is not necessarily steep decline. It is actually, if we're starting from 2020, a slight increase in price. And so really, for those of you that are taking a strong interest in this story, there needs to be, I think, further actions taken to drive down the upfront price, especially of the Class 8 vehicles, but I wouldn't say exclusively of those across the board. And this ties into a lot of concerns that folks have about the price of things in general. This market will transition faster if we can get the prices of these products lower. And that may require public action. So as a way to conclude sort of this set of slides, I wanted to pull up just this perspective on what are the types of actions that make sense to further drive this transition. And I just like dividing actions up into these three simple buckets. Stimulating demand, stimulating supply, really. When I say production and sales, I mean the supply. and then scaling up the timely deployment of charging infrastructure. And here I thought it would be useful just to tease out some of the things that are in the report that has been released and that we're talking about today. The CLEE mile standard extended to shippers, the revenue neutral sales incentive. This would be a supply side incentive that would actually incentivize the manufacturers to sell more and cheaper electric trucks without drawing from the budget, right? It's revenue neutral. And then on the infrastructure side, here I'm teasing out one idea that certainly emerged for me in my conversations with folks that struggle to get timely access to the electric grid. It's understanding where exactly the capacity exists and getting access to that capacity without having to spend $50,000 for a study that may or may not tell you whether capacity is there. So getting true visibility that is actionable is something that, from my perspective, would certainly accelerate the scale of deployment of charging infrastructure and also reduce the timeline to delivering that infrastructure. And this perspective that I'm sharing, I hope communicates the fact that it's not one thing, that it's all these things combined. It's an ecosystem approach that, from my perspective, can ensure that California retains its leadership and leads also other US states in the world in this transition. So, Ethan, I hope that was helpful to you, and I hope I answered your question.
Yes, no, thank you so much, Ray. Wonderful to have these charts. You did get a couple questions in the Q&A, which might be better answered in writing if you're able to get to that. And for anyone else who has questions about anything Ray showed, please do use the Q&A function. So now I want to turn to Adam. And Adam, similar question to you. How exactly is your company kind of seeing the landscape now for clean trucks? And, what's on your wish list for what you'd like to see done here in California and, potentially beyond?
Awesome. Thanks for that. I've got a couple of slides as well here to go through that hope to share some of the answers to that.
Yes, we
Go
see.
ahead and
All right, so we see the slides in presenter view.
man. Boom. Here we go.
Yep.
So I'm with Forum Mobility. We build large truck charging depots and then offer the trucking carriers, the motor carriers, either charging or a truck plus charging together. We are principally focused right now on port drayage operations, and our flagship project is right now inside the port of Long Beach, where we've got a 9 megawatt depot that has 44 charging spaces, and we have about 12 different carriers operating out of it right now, and have been operating for about a year. We're at about 2 million miles collectively of zero-emission freight served to date. So I can say, the technology works. This whole program is actually happening. And I can say even more than that we are on the cusp of a generational transition to zero-emission freight. I think with sustained policy support, we can continue and actually make that happen with wonderful impacts for both the environment, but really also for lower costs in terms of shipping. So, we define the goal is not only lowering the emissions, but also lowering costs for trucking carriers. I would also just like to benchmark this, like what we see globally. This is a transition that is doable, and we know that because it's happening faster elsewhere. In China, we are, I think the latest figures that I've seen, that it was upwards of 25% of heavy duty truck sales last quarter or last half of the year were zero emission, were electric. We are not at that scale, at that pace right now, but what exists, I would submit, is actually doable. So this report, I think, is quite timely as we look forward to the pathway forward. Many of our sort of California's standard sort of mandate tools have been under attack by the Trump administration. And so the state is now smartly, of course, pivoting to a more carrot than stick approach. And I think broadly, I'm looking at really kind of three different buckets here. My buckets are a little different than Ray's. So the first is, how do we make trucks cheaper? And I think the tried and true methodology, this is something that California is really quite good at. We've done this before in solar. When I first got involved in solar about 25 years ago, it was the most expensive way of making electricity. Now, through sustained policy support, essentially buying expensive solar, it is now globally scaled up where it is the cheapest way of generating electricity with more than 1.5 gigawatts of capacity installed per day. An incredible success story. So, we need a temporary time-delimited incentives to help make the investment at cost parity, drive deployment, build scale, bring down costs. The second pathway is cost aside, let's make EV trucks more valuable. I've got a slide on that going forward. The third is really focused on the shipper community, the people that own the actual cargo, and I'll share a little bit on that going forward. So we already have some of these policies, and the report delineates more that could be considered and should be considered. But first of all, the idea behind green lanes, allowing zero-emission trucks to have prioritized access in the terminals. This is for the port drayage. Drayage is when the container ships come in with containers, they need to get out of the port and get to their next destination, a distribution center. And this is generally a specialized fleet of trucks that do this. They drive about 1 billion miles a year in California. And some of the terminals at the major ports have dedicated lanes where zero-emission trucks don't wait at all. And that means that if you have one of those, you can avoid hours worth of sitting around in your truck. You can deliver more containers. You can make more money. So it's a non-monetary way of adding value and making electric trucks more valuable. We would love to see more of these. It's really important. Similarly, there's a program in the South Coast Air Quality Management District called the WARE program that is designed to help address fees around warehousing. If you drive an electric truck, you can avoid those fees, and that is a way that those trucks are now much more valuable in the marketplace. The final one that I did really want to lean in on is that we're really trying to solve for these small carriers or large carriers, and for them to make an investment in electric trucks, it's a scary thing. There is a collaboration, I would say, with the shipper community, the cargo owning community, where all they need to do is just say, if you have electric trucks, I will prioritize giving business to you. You'll have the right of first refusal, if you will. So Lime Scooters, for example, they made a dedicated commitment to utilizing zero-emission freight where it's available. Our first customer, Rudy Diaz there, pictured with his team at Height Electric, got that contract and is now providing them with exclusively zero-emission drayage. Rudy started with, we installed 3 chargers and leased him 4 electric trucks. He's now over 20 trucks, really built on the back of these partnerships with the cargo owners that, again, are playing their role by helping Rudy de-risk his investments and giving him the confidence in order to invest into more trucks. So that I think I'm going to stop with my slide sharing. I did want to just sort of contextualize the policy discussion. Happy to turn this over to question and answers. Ethan, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you so much, Adam. Question for you. This was a question that we got in earlier when Commissioner Skinner was speaking, and I wanted to direct it to you as well, which is a question around the grid build out. The questioner notes that the battery charging is almost less of an issue than just trying to get the grid build out there. So I'm wondering how your company is dealing with that issue.
Yeah, you saw that site there in the Port of Long Beach, 9 megawatts of power. That's like an NFL stadium. Like these do take a lot of power. A lot of our company has come over from the solar industry. Our superpower is figuring out where on the grid that you can build and securing that interconnection and doing so. So yes, it is a challenge. Hosting capacity can be scarce, especially in PG&E territory. It is not insurmountable. It is not the main gridlock. The main gridlock right now is actually the number of trucks and really the cost of these trucks. I can say to that point as well, the Tesla Semi is an absolute game changer. It is, at twice the range of other trucks. It's about 500 miles. That just opens up entire new use cases. Commissioner Skinner laid out some cost numbers. I can say I'm under NDA, so I can't say what those cost numbers are, but I can also say that she's not quite correct. It is a transformative price point that they are offering here. Our customers are loving it. They have ordered hundreds. And right now, I think it sets the standard by which all the other OEMs are going to need to meet and beat. But they're building that factory out in Sparks, Nevada. They're starting to put it into real production. And, out of anything, that really gives me hope for for the job ahead. This is what we've been working towards. The investment that catalyzes, real production of, a step change in technology.
Well, that's a very hopeful note here as we're just about out of time, but very good to hear about that major advancement. We'll look forward to seeing more of those on the road. I did get to see one of the Tesla electric semis driving through the Central Valley. Ray, just wanted to bring you in. I basically probably have time for one last question here before we have to break, but just curious kind of what you're following, thinking about this year ahead in California. What do you see as sort of the prime solutions that you would like to see acted on? What are you tracking in California policy circles?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Ethan. Well, I think to Adam's point, we're very much focused on how we can, you know, provide greater clarity and education around policies that can drive down the price of these products. And so I think competition helps. And certainly with all the mention of Tesla, there's already the suggestion, if we just look at the vouchers that CARB has released for its HVIP program, the Tesla Semi may have already taken up 80% of those. So at the starting gate, it's at an 80% market share from that perspective, right? So this is what happens when you have competition, when you have a manufacturer who wants to sell a product, who's pricing it to sell, and who's designing a product that is best in class in terms of range, in terms of charging capabilities, in terms of payload, carrying capacity. So how can we, in other words, stimulate more of that type of competition? And I think something that I'm paying a lot of attention to, of course, is the incentives and the ways in which incentives are designed to support greater competition and greater technological advancements and lower cost products. So we have existing incentive programs like HVIP. Our organization has also published recently about a big tranche, about $6 billion over the next 10 years of money that's going to come from the amendments to the LCFS, where there will be a lot of new money for incentives. It's really key that those incentives be designed so that they are requiring price transparency as a way to encourage competition across this marketplace. And not only that, but setting incentive amounts that are maximizing the deployment of trucks with each public dollar.
Yeah.
So there needs to be a lot more of a feedback loop, I think, in how we design the incentive programs and their amounts so that that price information is actually feeding back into the incentives. And like I said, ensuring we're deploying a maximum number of electric trucks so that organizations like Adams are able to soak up and maximize the utilization of their infrastructure, which feeds more investment in infrastructure, and then we get the positive feedback loop.
No, thank you so much, Ray. That's a good note to end on because HVIP is something that California can control. The incentives are something that California has a lot of leeway, even with the budget challenges that we heard Commissioner Skinner talk about. Unfortunately, we're out of time. We could spend a lot more time, a lot more questions, but just want to thank you both, Adam and Ray. So a virtual round of applause. Thank you for joining the panel. That's all the time that we have. I also want to thank Commissioner Skinner for her remarks and Marie Grimm for running through the report findings, and my colleagues and friends at UCLA, Kara Horowitz and her team, and of course, Bank of America for their support. Again, the report is available at climatepolicysolutions.org. It's driving demand, solutions to increase the market for heavy-duty zero-emission vehicles. Please do check it out. Also sign up on the CLEE and UCLA Emmett Institute websites if you want to get more notices about reports like this coming out in the future. Otherwise, thank you all so much for joining us. Hope you have a great rest of your week, and we look forward to staying in touch. Thanks a lot.